Tonight, allow your breathing to slow as we follow the peaceful footsteps of Hermes, the gentle traveler of ancient Greece. There is no hurry here, only quiet roads, distant hills, calm rivers, and the steady rhythm of journeys made with patience. Close your eyes, leave the noise of the modern world behind, and drift into a soothing story where every path leads gently onward beneath the endless Greek sky. Before his name traveled across mountains and seas, Hermes entered the world in a peaceful corner of Arcadia. Gentle hills rose beneath the early light, while quiet forests stretched across the slopes. In a secluded cave on Mount Cyllene, the nymph Maia lived far from the lively gatherings of the other gods. She preferred silence over celebration, allowing the passing seasons to shape her days. It was within this calm refuge that the child of Maia and Zeus was born, surrounded not by ceremony, but by the steady sounds of wind, birds, and distant flowing water. Maia was one of the Pleiades, daughters of Atlas, yet she chose a hidden life among the mountains. Ancient poets described her as gentle and reserved, keeping away from the splendor of Olympus. Her quiet home reflected her nature, filled with the soft rhythm of ordinary days. Here, the newborn Hermes rested beside his mother, wrapped in peaceful stillness. The world beyond the hills remained distant, while the cave offered warmth, shelter, and the calm beginning of a remarkable divine life. The Arcadian landscape held an enduring sense of tranquility. Pine trees covered the hillsides, streams wound through the valleys, and mist drifted gently each morning. These surroundings formed the earliest setting known to Hermes. Rather than grand palaces or shining temples, his first home was shaped by earth and stone. Greek storytellers often connected Arcadia with simplicity and peaceful living, making it a fitting birthplace for a god whose paths would one day stretch across every corner of the world. Although Hermes was an infant, ancient tradition remembered him as unusually alert from the beginning. His story speaks of quick understanding rather than loud displays of power. Even in these earliest moments, the peaceful cave seemed to contain a quiet energy waiting to unfold. The gentle air, the steady glow of daylight at the entrance, and the calm presence of Maia created an atmosphere where stillness and cleverness could exist together without disturbance. Zeus, king of the gods, was acknowledged as Hermes' father, yet his presence did not fill the cave with thunder or spectacle. The traditions surrounding Hermes' birth remained surprisingly gentle. Instead of dramatic signs, the focus rests upon the secluded place where Maia cared for her son. The peaceful mountain setting became part of Hermes' identity, reminding listeners that greatness in Greek mythology could begin in quiet places far from royal halls. The cave itself carried symbolic meaning in Greek imagination. Caves often marked places of transition, shelter, and hidden beginnings. Protected by stone and embraced by the mountain, Hermes spent his earliest hours within a natural sanctuary. Outside, the forests continued their timeless rhythm, untouched by haste. The calm surroundings invited careful observation, encouraging the slow unfolding of a story that would later travel far beyond Arcadia. Morning light gradually reached the entrance, tracing quiet patterns across the stone floor. Shadows shifted almost unnoticed as the hours passed. Such gentle details remind us that Greek myths often begin with simple images before larger adventures emerge. In Hermes' case, the earliest memory belongs not to movement but to rest, with the mountain holding its silence around the newborn god and his peaceful home. Mount Cyllene itself remained an important landmark in later traditions about Hermes. Travelers and poets remembered it as the place where his story first touched the earth. The mountain stood high above the valleys, watching seasons come and go without urgency. Snow sometimes rested upon its upper slopes, while lower meadows welcomed flowers in spring. This enduring landscape quietly preserved the memory of Hermes' first days. Maya's peaceful character shaped the atmosphere around her child. She is rarely described as seeking power or attention. Instead, her quiet devotion offered Hermes a beginning marked by comfort and balance. The stories leave room for stillness, allowing the listener to imagine gentle mornings, cool mountain air, and the steady presence of a caring mother within the shelter of the cave. Ancient Greece held many sacred mountains, yet Arcadia possessed a special reputation for untouched nature. Shepherds guided their flocks across open hills, streams reflected the changing sky, and forests stretched into the distance. These peaceful surroundings formed the backdrop to Hermes' earliest chapter. Long before roads, markets, or temples became associated with him, the quiet rhythms of the countryside filled the space around his birthplace. As daylight moved gently across the mountain, the cave remained cool and calm. The newborn Hermes rested within a place shaped by natural stone rather than human hands. Greek mythology often places profound beginnings inside ordinary landscapes, suggesting that the sacred may quietly exist alongside familiar hills, trees, and flowing streams. The birthplace of Hermes reflects that peaceful tradition with remarkable simplicity. The silence surrounding Mount Cyllene was never empty. Birds called from distant branches, leaves stirred softly in the breeze, and water continued its patient course through the valleys below. These gentle sounds formed the earliest music of Hermes' world. Nothing hurried, and nothing demanded attention. The mountains simply carried on, offering a calm beginning worthy of a restful telling. Generations of poets preserved this peaceful origin, connecting Hermes forever with Arcadia's hills. Even as later stories celebrated his cleverness, speed, and wide-ranging journeys, they continued to remember the quiet cave where everything began. The contrast between humble beginnings and later importance became one of the gentle patterns woven throughout Greek mythology, encouraging careful reflection rather than loud celebration. As the day slowly settled over Arcadia, the hills remained unchanged, holding their quiet beauty with patient certainty. Within that secluded mountain refuge, Hermes' first chapter rested gently in the embrace of nature. The peaceful cave, the calm presence of Maya, and the enduring landscape together formed a beginning that felt steady and timeless, inviting the story to unfold at an unhurried pace beneath the broad Greek sky. Morning light often found Hermes already on the road, moving with an effortless pace known only to a divine traveler. Ancient Greek paths wound through hills, olive groves, and quiet valleys, linking villages, sanctuaries, and distant cities. Merchants, poets, shepherds, and messengers relied upon these worn tracks, though few could ever hope to match Hermes' graceful speed. His sandals, adorned with small wings, symbolized the freedom to cross every landscape without strain. Yet even a god in motion could bring a sense of calm, as every measured step carried purpose, balance, and quiet confidence across the peaceful countryside. The roads themselves were humble creations, shaped gradually by countless footsteps rather than grand design. They followed rivers, curved around rocky slopes, and climbed toward mountain passes with patient determination. Hermes understood every bend and familiar landmark, greeting each path as an old companion. In mythology, his journeys connected not only places but also people, allowing messages, trade, and stories to flow across the Greek world. Every quiet mile reflected movement without hurry, where distance unfolded gently beneath the steady rhythm of walking. Small stone markers known as Hermes stood beside many roads, offering silent reminders of Hermes' protection. These square pillars carried a carved head of the god, watching over crossroads and boundaries with steady attention. Travelers passing by often acknowledged them with simple respect before continuing onward. The statues did not demand grand ceremonies. Their calm presence suggested that every honest journey deserved guidance, whether the traveler carried precious goods, important news, or simply hopes for a safe return before evening settled across the hills. As the sun climbed higher, the air filled softly with familiar sounds. Birds crossed the open sky, cicadas sang among warm grasses, and distant streams quietly followed their own timeless paths. Hermes moved through this living landscape without disturbing its gentle rhythm. Rather than commanding nature, he seemed perfectly at home within it. His role as a traveler reflected harmony with changing seasons, shifting weather, and the simple beauty found along ordinary roads that generations had quietly shared. Every crossroads carried quiet importance in Greek thought. Decisions made there shape the direction of a journey, even when the choices appeared small. Hermes watched over these meeting places with thoughtful care, not forcing one path above another, but offering guidance to those willing to continue with courage and wisdom. A crossroads became less a place of uncertainty than a reminder that every destination begins with a single calm decision, followed patiently by many steady steps. Travel in ancient Greece required patience. Mountain ranges divided regions, and many routes rose gently before descending again toward fertile plains or quiet harbors. Hermes crossed these changing landscapes with ease, yet his stories never suggested that speed alone held value. The journey itself mattered. Every hill revealed a broader horizon, every valley welcomed cool shade, and every familiar path carried memories of those who had walked there long before, leaving peaceful traces upon the land. Although Hermes is remembered as a swift messenger of Zeus, his travels were not filled with constant urgency. Many myths describe him observing the world with curiosity, appreciating music, conversation, and clever ideas encountered along the way. Roads offered opportunities to witness daily life unfolding quietly across Greece. Farmers tended fields, shepherds guided flocks, and distant temples appeared slowly upon the horizon, each becoming another peaceful landmark along the endless network of ancient paths. Olive trees often lined portions of these old roads, their silvery leaves shimmering softly whenever gentle breezes arrived. Their long lives reminded travelers that generations could pass, while the same trees continued offering shade. Hermes walked beneath their branches countless times in mythic imagination, carrying messages that belonged to one age before moving effortlessly into another. Time itself seemed slower beneath the olives, inviting every traveler to appreciate the quiet endurance of the landscape. As evening approached, golden light stretched across stone paths and low hills. Shadows grew longer without bringing haste. Hermes remained a reassuring figure for those still walking toward their destination before nightfall. His presence suggested that even when daylight faded, familiar roads continued leading faithfully onward. Ancient travelers understood that calm preparation, steady pacing, and respect for the landscape were often the greatest companions during every peaceful journey across Greece. Nearby sanctuaries often appeared after long stretches of travel, offering places to pause before continuing onward. Pilgrims visited these sacred spaces carrying gratitude, hopes, or simple offerings gathered from nearby fields. Hermes, welcomed among many gods, understood these peaceful pauses between destinations. Rest was never separate from the journey itself. Moments of stillness prepared both body and mind for the gentle miles that remained beyond the temple gates and familiar stone pathways. Night gradually settled over the countryside, revealing stars that had guided travelers for countless generations. The familiar roads disappeared into soft darkness, while remaining unchanged beneath the quiet sky. Hermes, comfortable in every hour, continued moving between villages, mountains, and distant shores. His confidence came not from endless speed, but from complete familiarity with every route. Even unseen roads could be trusted when remembered with patience and careful attention. The ancient Greeks understood roads as threads connecting communities across rugged landscapes. Through them traveled friendships, trade, music, ideas, and stories that gradually shaped shared traditions. Hermes became the graceful symbol of these invisible connections. Wherever a road reached another village or sanctuary, it quietly strengthened the bonds between people separated by hills, forests, or the sea. Each peaceful journey carried more than footsteps alone. It carried the gentle movement of culture itself. Even today, many old paths across Greece still follow routes once known in antiquity. Walking among weathered stones and quiet hills invites gentle reflection on countless travelers who came before. In imagination, Hermes remains only a few silent steps ahead, guiding each peaceful journey with calm assurance. His enduring presence reminds us that ancient roads were never merely ways to reach distant places. They were living pathways connecting landscapes, memories, and the timeless rhythm of human travel. With every quiet mile complete, the road itself became part of the story. Hermes needed no grand destination to give meaning to his travels, for each peaceful path revealed another corner of the Greek world worthy of gentle attention. The hills rested beneath changing skies, the stones remembered forgotten footsteps, and the landscape welcomed every careful traveler without haste. In that calm procession across ancient Greece, movement and stillness existed together, carrying the quiet spirit of Hermes along every enduring road. Among the many quiet duties of Hermes was the gentle carrying of messages. While poets often remembered his speed, the stories also suggest remarkable patience. He moved between the bright halls of Olympus and the winding paths of the earth without disturbing either place. His words were not his own, yet he delivered them faithfully, neither adding nor removing their meaning. In this steady role, Hermes became a bridge between immortal intentions and human understanding. Each journey unfolded with calm purpose, following mountain trails, river valleys, and peaceful coastlines beneath the familiar Greek sky. The winged sandals that later artists loved to depict were symbols of graceful movement rather than noisy haste. Hermes crossed forests where pine trees whispered softly and past olive groves resting beneath warm afternoon light. Every step suggested confidence without urgency. The gods relied upon him because he could travel freely between distant places, always arriving with quiet certainty. His presence was light enough that villages often returned to their ordinary rhythms, almost as soon as he had continued along the next gentle road. Sometimes the messages carried hope, confirming a blessing or offering guidance after careful prayer. At other times they carried warnings that invited wisdom instead of fear. Greek myths rarely describe Hermes changing these messages according to personal preference. His strength rested in faithful delivery. Like a calm stream reflecting the morning sky, he allowed the intentions of Olympus to pass through him without becoming clouded. This quiet honesty made him one of the most trusted figures among the divine companions of Zeus. Many ancient sanctuaries welcomed travelers who paused before continuing their journeys. Hermes naturally belonged near these places, where roads met and choices gently unfolded. Stone markers known as Hermes stood beside pathways, reminding passers-by that travel deserved both care and respect. These familiar landmarks quietly reflected his protection over movement, communication, and safe passage. Whether someone was carrying goods, news, or simple greetings between neighboring communities, The peaceful spirit associated with Hermes seemed to accompany every measured step. When Hermes entered the courts of kings, his role remained remarkably balanced. He spoke with clarity rather than grandeur, delivering divine instructions without seeking praise for himself. Ancient storytellers often valued this restraint, recognizing that the messenger served truth before reputation. Once his words had been received, Hermes continued onward with little ceremony. His quiet departures reflected the nature of his task. The message belonged to those who heard it, while the road itself patiently welcomed the messenger toward another peaceful destination. Not every message required spoken language. A favorable breeze across the sea, a clear path through mountain passes, or the timely arrival of a traveler could all suggest divine kindness within the poetic imagination of ancient Greece. Hermes became associated with fortunate meetings and gentle opportunities. Rather than forcing events, he appeared where movement naturally connected lives. His presence reminded listeners that meaningful encounters often arrived quietly, unfolding with the same calm rhythm as footsteps upon worn stone roads. Hermes also guided communication among the gods themselves. Olympus was home to many powerful voices, each with unique concerns and responsibilities. A reliable messenger helped preserve harmony by ensuring that intentions reached their proper destination. This dependable service reflected order rather than excitement. While thunder belonged to Zeus and the sea answered to Poseidon, Hermes quietly maintained the pathways between conversations, allowing the divine world to remain connected through steady and respectful exchange. Ancient hymns sometimes praise Hermes for his intelligence alongside his swiftness. Cleverness, in these traditions, was not merely quick thinking but thoughtful understanding of people and circumstances. A skilled messenger needed both qualities. Knowing when to arrive, how to approach, and how to preserve the dignity of every listener required careful judgment. These gentle abilities transformed ordinary travel into meaningful service, where each completed journey quietly strengthened the invisible threads connecting heaven and earth. Across valleys bright with wildflowers and hills covered in silver-green olive trees, the roads of Greece linked temples, farms, harbors, and distant cities. Hermes belonged to every stretch of these landscapes. His stories gently celebrated movement itself, suggesting that every destination began with one peaceful step. Travelers who remembered him were invited to continue with confidence rather than haste, trusting that careful progress often carried greater wisdom than rushing toward the horizon. Because Hermes traveled so widely, he became familiar with countless human lives. Shepherds watching their flocks, merchants guiding pack animals, poets seeking quiet inspiration, and sailors preparing calm departures all belonged to the varied world through which he moved. The myths rarely linger on dramatic meetings. Instead, they leave space for peaceful imagination, allowing Hermes to remain a gentle companion, whose steady presence quietly linked ordinary moments with the larger order of the divine. The caduceus, the staff carried by Hermes, gradually became one of his most recognizable symbols. In Greek tradition, it represented the authority of the divine messenger and peaceful negotiation rather than conflict. Held calmly during his journeys, it suggested balance and measured purpose. Like the roads beneath his feet, the staff reflected connection instead of division. Through this simple object, storytellers expressed the hope that understanding could travel as steadily as any traveler crossing the ancient landscape. As daylight softened into evening, Hermes was often imagined continuing onward beneath quiet stars. His work did not depend upon bright sunlight alone. Roads remained familiar beneath moonlight, and distant temples rested peacefully in the cool night air. The silence of evening suited his calm responsibilities. Messages carried with care retain their importance whether delivered at dawn or beneath constellations, slowly turning above the mountains of Greece. The gentle rhythm of Hermes' journeys reminds us that communication was considered a sacred responsibility in many Greek traditions. Truthful words required careful handling, thoughtful delivery, and respectful listening. These values echoed across generations of storytellers who preserved the myths. Hermes became more than a swift traveler. He represented the quiet trust that allows distant people, distant places, and even distant worlds to remain peacefully connected through faithful exchange. When the stories settle into stillness, Hermes continues walking beyond the edge of every familiar road. There is no sense of hurry, only the steady continuation of meaningful journeys. Mountains rest beneath gentle clouds, olive trees sway in slow breezes, and the sea reflects the fading light. Somewhere along those peaceful paths, the quiet messenger carries another careful word between gods and mortals, leaving behind only calm footsteps and the enduring comfort of faithful purpose. Hermes was remembered not only in bustling marketplaces or among swift messengers, but also along quiet country paths where ordinary people traveled at an unhurried pace. Shepherds leading gentle flocks, families carrying baskets between neighboring villages, and solitary wanderers crossing low hills all moved beneath the broad Greek sky. Ancient tradition honored Hermes as a guardian of roads and safe passage, someone whose presence brought confidence rather than urgency. Small roadside shrines, simple piles of carefully placed stones, reminded travelers that every peaceful journey, however modest, could begin with gratitude and continue beneath calm, unseen protection. Country life followed rhythms that changed little from season to season. At sunrise, shepherds opened wooden gates and guided sheep toward fresh grass while cool air drifted across quiet valleys. Hermes was closely connected with these peaceful routines, watching over flocks and those who depended upon them. Rather than grand adventures, many days offered gentle repetition, where familiar hills, distant olive groves, and quiet streams created a comforting pattern. In such landscapes, mythology settled naturally beside everyday work, allowing the divine to feel close without disturbing the calm of ordinary life. The caduceus, Hermes' familiar staff entwined with two serpents, came to represent balance and peaceful passage in many ancient traditions. Carried through stories rather than fields, it suggested harmony instead of conflict. Travelers could imagine its quiet symbolism accompanying them as roads curved between mountains and gentle plains. Even when no shrine appeared nearby, the landscape itself seemed welcoming, with broad skies overhead and distant villages waiting beyond the next hill. The journey became less about haste and more about moving carefully through a world that invited patience. Greek shepherds often knew every hill, spring, and shaded grove within their familiar countryside. Their work demanded observation rather than speed. They watched weather gathering over distant ridges, listened for the soft bells of wandering animals, and rested beneath ancient trees during the warmest hours. Hermes fit naturally into this peaceful world because he understood movement without chaos. His presence belonged equally to long roads and quiet pauses, reminding listeners that gentle progress often unfolds through many small, steady steps instead of dramatic leaps. Roads connecting ancient Greek communities were often simple tracks worn smooth by generations of feet and hooves. Merchants, pilgrims, shepherds, and neighbors all shared these familiar paths. Hermes, honored as protector of travelers, quietly belonged to each of them without demanding elaborate ceremonies. A respectful greeting at a roadside marker or a thoughtful pause before continuing could be enough. Such modest customs reflected a wider belief that kindness, caution, and gratitude made every journey gentler, regardless of its length or destination. The countryside itself carried a soothing rhythm that ancient poets often admired. Wind moved through tall grasses, insects hummed softly beneath the summer sun, and distant birds traced slow circles overhead. Hermes did not need magnificent temples to be remembered. A peaceful hillside, a flowing stream, or a quiet crossroads could all become places where his presence was quietly imagined. In mythology, the gods were not confined to marble buildings alone. Nature itself often served as a gentle reminder of their enduring companionship. Shepherds frequently relied upon memory instead of written maps. Every familiar rock, twisted tree, or mountain ridge became part of an invisible guide through the landscape. Hermes, associated with guidance and direction, reflected this quiet confidence in knowing where one belonged. His wisdom was practical as much as divine, encouraging careful attention to the land itself. Gentle observation allowed travelers to move safely, noticing changing light, weather, and terrain with calm awareness rather than anxious haste. Hospitality held great importance throughout ancient Greece. A traveler arriving peacefully at a farmhouse or village could often expect water, bread, and a place to rest before continuing onward. Hermes, whose journeys connected distant places, naturally belonged within these quiet acts of welcome. The exchange of simple kindness strengthened communities scattered across valleys and islands. Mythology gently echoed these customs, reminding people that every guest might carry stories, blessings, or friendships from lands beyond the next range of hills. The soft ringing of sheep bells drifting across open hills became part of everyday life for countless generations. Such sounds blended with breezes and birdsong into a peaceful chorus that required no audience. Hermes, guardian of shepherds, seemed perfectly suited to these quiet landscapes where gentle movement mattered more than spectacle. His stories reminded listeners that ordinary lives possessed dignity of their own. Caring for animals, walking familiar roads, and respecting the changing seasons all carried quiet meaning within Greek tradition. Many ancient roads crossed low stone bridges spanning narrow streams. Travelers paused there to drink fresh water, adjust their sandals, or simply admire the gentle current below. Hermes watched over these moments as faithfully as longer journeys. Rest was not considered wasted time, but a natural part of traveling well. Even the smallest pause could restore strength, allowing each step afterward to feel lighter beneath the warm Mediterranean sky. Olive groves shaded generations of farmers and travelers alike. Their silvery leaves shimmered quietly whenever the breeze crossed the hills, creating a calm atmosphere that changed little across centuries. Hermes belonged comfortably within these enduring landscapes because his role reached beyond movement alone. He connected places, people, and traditions that slowly grew together over time. Every peaceful road passing beneath ancient branches carried memories of countless quiet journeys completed without haste. As daylight slowly softened into evening, shepherds gathered their flocks and returned toward familiar homes. Dusk settled upon quiet roads while long shadows stretched across fields. Hermes remained a reassuring companion for these final miles, guiding peaceful returns just as faithfully as new departures. His mythology celebrated motion, yet it also honored coming safely home. The calm ending of each day's walk carried its own quiet satisfaction, requiring no grand celebration beyond the comfort of arrival. The stars above ancient Greece appeared one by one as darkness settled gently across valleys and mountains. Travelers who remained upon the road often continued beneath their steady light, trusting familiar routes and patient footsteps. Hermes, swift among the gods, also understood quiet endurance. Not every journey demanded speed. Sometimes steady progress beneath peaceful skies carried travelers exactly where they needed to be, allowing calm determination to guide every mile. Through stories of roads, shepherds, and quiet countryside, Hermes became more than a messenger of Olympus. He reflected the gentle movement that shaped everyday Greek life, where ordinary journeys connected families, villages, and seasons. His presence rested comfortably beside grazing fields, winding paths, and silent hills rather than constant excitement. Remembering Hermes in this peaceful way reveals a god who accompanied simple lives with quiet care, inviting every traveler to move through the world with patience, balance, and gentle confidence. Hermes knew the quiet places where one landscape became another. A winding river was never simply water flowing toward the sea. It marked a gentle boundary between valleys, villages, and familiar ways of living. Travelers paused beside smooth stones, listening to the current before continuing their journeys. Hermes was remembered as a companion who understood such crossings, moving with calm certainty from one place to the next. His sandals carried him lightly over paths that generations had walked before. The rivers of Greece reflected morning light, evening stars, and passing clouds, reminding every traveler that movement could be peaceful when each careful step followed the steady rhythm of nature. Among Hermes, many gentle responsibilities was guiding those who traveled between different worlds. Ancient poets described him as the psychopomp, the quiet guide of souls. This duty was not imagined as one of fear or struggle, but as careful companionship. Hermes did not judge those he escorted. Instead, he ensured that each soul reached its proper destination according to the order established by the gods. His presence represented calm passage rather than uncertainty. Like a patient traveler who knows every bend in an old road, Hermes crossed unseen boundaries with confidence, bringing order wherever transitions quietly unfolded. The river Styx was among the most respected waters in Greek tradition. Its name carried great solemnity, for even the Olympian gods honored oaths sworn upon it. Yet the river itself remained part of the quiet geography imagined by ancient storytellers. Its dark current flowed steadily, untouched by storms of emotion. Hermes approached such sacred places without haste. His task was never to disturb the stillness, but to move through it with perfect understanding. In these stories, the greatest strength often appeared not in loud displays, but in peaceful confidence and faithful service. Near the entrance to the underworld, silence became part of the landscape itself. The paths grew calm, and the ordinary sounds of fields and villages slowly faded away. Hermes was familiar with these tranquil roads because they belonged to his sacred responsibilities. Ancient audiences imagined him walking without fear, carrying neither heavy burdens nor sharp weapons. Instead, he carried certainty. His quiet presence reassured that every journey had its proper direction. Even at the edge of mysterious places, Greek mythology often allowed calm order to exist beside the unknown. Another river remembered in Greek tradition was the Acron, whose slow waters formed part of the landscape surrounding the realm of Hades. Ancient poets described these rivers with thoughtful detail, giving shape to places that no living traveler expected to visit. Hermes belonged naturally within these stories because he understood every path connecting distant realms. His movement remained graceful and measured, never hurried. The flowing water became a symbol of steady passage, reminding listeners that every road, whether familiar or mysterious, followed its own peaceful course through time. Hermes carried the caduceus, the familiar staff around which two serpents were intertwined. Although later traditions gave it many meanings, in Greek mythology it served as one of his recognizable symbols. The staff reflected balance, peaceful authority, and the ability to travel safely between different places. As Hermes crossed rivers and boundaries, the caduceus appeared as a sign that order accompanied him. It did not demand attention through force. Instead, like a carefully placed milestone beside an old road, it quietly represented guidance, calm movement, and trusted responsibility. Many rivers in Greece were connected with local gods called river deities, each associated with the flowing waters of a particular region. Their streams nourished fields, orchards, and villages, shaping daily life as much as mythology. Hermes, whose journeys extended across the entire Greek world, naturally passed through these landscapes. Every crossing reflected respect for local traditions and the enduring presence of nature. The rivers themselves continued their patient course, long before travelers arrived and long after they departed, carrying quiet reflections beneath broad open skies. Stone bridges appeared only in certain places, while many crossings relied upon shallow fords or carefully chosen stepping stones. Travelers learned to read the water, watching its gentle movement before continuing onward. Hermes, protector of travelers, represented thoughtful movement rather than reckless speed. Ancient stories often valued practical wisdom alongside divine power. Crossing safely required attention, patience, and respect for the landscape. In this way, even an ordinary river became part of a larger journey shaped by observation, balance, and quiet confidence. As daylight softened toward evening, rivers reflected warm colors across their calm surfaces. Shepherds gathered their flocks, merchants approached welcoming villages, and distant temple columns slowly turned golden beneath the setting sun. Hermes remained a fitting companion for these peaceful transitions between day and night. His journeys were woven into ordinary rhythms as much as into sacred stories. The changing light reminded ancient listeners that every ending naturally prepared the way for another beginning, carried gently forward like water following its timeless course. The Greeks often imagined boundaries not as walls, but as places where one path gradually became another. Hills opened into valleys, forests gave way to farmland, and rivers connected rather than divided distant regions. Hermes belonged to these meeting places because his nature reflected movement itself. He traveled without disturbing the harmony around him, linking cities, sanctuaries, and households through steady passage. Every quiet crossing celebrated the idea that different worlds could remain connected through wisdom, respect, and peaceful travel. Hermes also reminded listeners that guidance could be gentle. His myths rarely depended upon loud declarations or grand displays. Instead, he often appeared precisely where a journey required direction. Near rivers, crossroads, and distant boundaries, his presence suggested that careful movement was itself a form of wisdom. Ancient travelers likely found comfort in this image while walking long roads beneath changing weather. The quiet confidence of Hermes became a reassuring companion through landscapes both familiar and new. Flowing water has always invited reflection. Ancient Greeks watched rivers carry leaves, branches, and drifting light toward unseen destinations. Hermes, whose journeys connected many realms, fit naturally beside these endless currents. Every stream continued without hurry, following the shape of the land with patient consistency. This quiet movement echoed the calm rhythm of travel itself. The stories encouraged listeners to imagine steady progress instead of sudden change, where every gentle step eventually reached its proper destination. Even after countless journeys, the rivers of Greece remained unchanged in their patient work. They shaped valleys, nourished olive groves, and reflected the passing seasons. Hermes returned to these landscapes again and again, not because they demanded excitement, but because they offered dependable paths between distant places. The familiar sound of moving water became part of the quiet background of his endless travels. Every crossing blended naturally into the next, creating an unbroken rhythm across mountains, plains, and peaceful countryside. In the calm imagination of Greek mythology, Hermes continued onward with quiet purpose, crossing rivers, roads, and invisible boundaries alike. His journeys reflected trust rather than urgency, guidance rather than command. The landscapes through which he traveled remained spacious and serene, shaped by flowing water, open skies, and enduring stone. Long after the stories were first told, these peaceful images still invite the mind to wander gently through ancient Greece, where every river quietly carried both memory and motion toward the horizon. Hermes was not only a divine messenger who crossed the skies between Olympus and the earth. Ancient Greeks also imagined him quietly present in the ordinary rhythm of daily life. At dawn, when homes slowly stirred awake and doors opened to the cool morning air, many believed Hermes watched over the first journeys of the day. A farmer leading a mule, a traveler adjusting a cloak, or a shepherd setting out across gentle hills, all moved beneath his unseen protection. His myths reached beyond grand adventures, settling softly among familiar routines that repeated with the changing seasons. Roads connected villages, sanctuaries, harbors, and distant cities. Along these paths stood stone markers called Hermes, carved with the head of Hermes upon a square pillar. Travelers greeted these monuments with quiet respect before continuing onward. They served as landmarks, symbols of protection, and reminders that every journey, whether long or short, deserved careful attention. Passing one of these weathered stones could bring a comforting sense that familiar roads stretched safely ahead, beneath the wide Mediterranean sky. Merchants preparing for market often remembered Hermes as a guardian of trade and honest exchange. Before baskets of olives, figs, pottery, or woven cloth changed hands, quiet offerings or simple prayers might be made in his honor. Success was welcomed, but so was fairness, clever judgment, and respectful conversation. Commerce was more than buying and selling. It connected neighbors, distant communities, and generations of skilled artisans whose work traveled slowly across the Greek world. The harbors of Greece welcomed countless small vessels that carried grain, wine, oil, and stories between islands and coastlines. Although Poseidon ruled the sea itself, Hermes accompanied those whose work depended upon movement and safe arrival. Sailors leaving familiar shores trusted that favorable fortune could accompany careful preparation. Their voyages reflected the steady rhythm of winds, tides, and seasons rather than haste, reminding every traveler that patience often carried people farther than speed. Hermes was also remembered as the patron of shepherds tending flocks across gentle hillsides. The quiet ringing of bells, the steady pace of grazing sheep, and the long walks between pastures reflected a peaceful way of life that changed little from one day to the next. Ancient stories connected Hermes with the countryside as naturally as with bustling roads. His presence belonged equally to mountain paths, open valleys, and quiet places where silence lingered. Messengers carried news across remarkable distances without the comfort of modern roads or swift transport. Hermes became their divine example because he represented clear communication and dependable travel. Every carefully delivered letter, spoken announcement, or important message depended upon memory, endurance, and trust. In this way, his legendary speed symbolized reliability as much as swiftness, encouraging the careful passage of words from one place to another. Children growing up in ancient Greece would have heard stories of Hermes from an early age. His cleverness often brought gentle laughter, yet his myths also taught practical lessons about wit, adaptability, and thoughtful action. Rather than relying only on great strength, Hermes showed that intelligence and calm observation could solve many difficulties. His stories fit naturally beside evening fires, where familiar tales passed quietly from one generation to the next. Travelers paused at crossroads where several paths met before choosing their direction. Such places naturally belonged to Hermes, whose guidance extended wherever roads divided and reunited. Decisions made at these intersections could shape an entire journey, yet they were often quiet moments filled with careful reflection rather than urgency. The surrounding countryside remained still, allowing each traveler to continue with renewed confidence beneath the broad Greek sky. Even artisans found quiet inspiration in Hermes. Potters, sculptors, and craftsmen depended not only upon steady hands, but also upon practical ingenuity. The gods' association with clever invention encouraged thoughtful solutions to everyday challenges. Ancient workshops echoed with patient effort, where useful objects slowly emerged through repetition, experience, and care. The calm rhythm of skilled work reflected values that were admired throughout Greek communities. Hermes also protected guests and hosts by supporting the peaceful customs of hospitality. Travelers arriving at unfamiliar homes were often welcomed with food, water, and a place to rest before any questions were asked. This tradition reflected respect for both strangers and the gods themselves. Safe shelter transformed long journeys into moments of quiet comfort, strengthening bonds between families separated by many miles of winding roads. As daylight softened toward evening, roads gradually emptied and villages became quieter. Farmers returned home with tools upon their shoulders, shepherds gathered their flocks, and merchants closed their stalls. Hermes remained connected to these peaceful transitions, quietly accompanying the ending of one day's travels before another would begin. His presence reflected movement without hurry, reminding ancient listeners that every journey eventually found its gentle resting place. Hermes carried the caduceus, a staff entwined by two serpents in later Greek tradition. While today it is often confused with symbols of medicine, in Greek mythology it represented his authority as a divine herald and peacemaker. The staff reminded listeners that messages could bring reconciliation instead of conflict. Calm speech, thoughtful negotiation, and careful diplomacy formed part of Hermes' enduring character throughout classical mythology. Throughout Greece, the influence of Hermes appeared less in dramatic displays than in ordinary moments that repeated every day. Each safe arrival, fair exchange, successful errand, and familiar walk along an old path reflected qualities associated with the swift god. His mythology gently blended with daily experience, making him one of the deities whose presence felt especially close to everyday life, rather than distant upon Mount Olympus. When the stars slowly appeared above the hills and the roads settled into silence, Hermes remained a quiet symbol of journeys completed with care. Ancient Greece remembered him not only through grand myths, but also through the peaceful routines that shaped ordinary lives. In every village path, weathered milestone, and well-traveled road, his gentle presence reminded people that even the simplest journey could carry quiet meaning when taken with patience and steady purpose. As morning light settled over the hills of Greece, Hermes quietly followed the roads that linked one village to another. Farmers carried baskets of olives, figs, and barley, while potters balanced their finished jars with patient care. Merchants greeted familiar faces before continuing toward distant towns. Hermes was remembered not only as the swift traveler among the Olympians, but also as the quiet guardian of roads, trade, and peaceful exchanges. His presence was imagined in the gentle confidence that allowed strangers to meet, speak honestly, and continue their journeys with calm hearts beneath the wide and welcoming sky. The marketplaces of ancient Greece often began slowly, long before the busiest hours arrived. Wooden stalls opened one by one, woven baskets were arranged with care, and fresh bread filled the morning air with a comforting scent. Although many voices would eventually mingle together, people believed Hermes favored skillful conversation and fair negotiation. Commerce was not simply the exchange of goods, but the sharing of trust between neighbors and travelers. Each careful agreement reflected a rhythm that unfolded naturally, carried along by patience rather than haste. Stone boundary markers known as Hermes stood beside roads, fields, and entrances throughout many parts of Greece. These carved pillars honored Hermes and quietly reminded travelers that paths connected communities rather than separated them. Passing one was an ordinary moment, yet it offered gentle reassurance that countless others had walked the same road before. Day after day, these familiar landmarks watched seasons change while merchants, shepherds, families, and wandering poets continued their peaceful journeys beneath shifting skies. Travel in the ancient world demanded patience more than speed. Roads curved around hills, crossed quiet valleys, and followed gentle rivers toward distant sanctuaries. Hermes represented confidence during these long passages, encouraging steady footsteps instead of hurried ones. Travelers often carried simple supplies, trusting both preparation and good fortune. Every familiar milestone, every shaded olive grove, and every cool spring beside the road offered small moments of rest that became just as valuable as reaching the destination itself. Messengers serving cities or kings sometimes imagined Hermes as the perfect example of graceful movement. His famous winged sandals symbolized divine swiftness, yet the stories rarely suggest frantic rushing. Instead, his journeys seemed effortless, flowing naturally between mountains, villages, and temples. Messages carried by Hermes often restored understanding or connected distant places. In this quiet way, movement itself became an act of harmony, linking separate lives through words delivered with calm certainty. Small village squares offered peaceful pauses along many roads. Wells provided cool water, old trees cast generous shade, and stone benches welcomed anyone who wished to rest for a while. Here merchants exchanged stories as often as goods, sharing news gathered from distant harbors or inland valleys. Hermes, protector of travelers, belonged naturally to these moments of quiet conversation. The simple act of listening carefully became another form of safe passage, allowing knowledge to travel gently from one community to another. Ancient Greek harbors also reflected Hermes' influence over trade and travel. Before ships departed, sailors checked ropes, folded sails carefully, and watched the changing winds with patient attention. Cargoes of wine, olive oil, pottery, and grain crossed familiar seas that connected countless coastal settlements. Although Poseidon ruled the waters themselves, Hermes remained closely associated with commerce and the movement of people between distant shores. Together, these traditions celebrated careful preparation and peaceful exchange across the Mediterranean. Not every journey was made for trade. Pilgrims walked towards sacred sanctuaries, families visited relatives in neighboring valleys, and poets wandered from city to city carrying songs instead of merchandise. Hermes watched over every peaceful traveler without demanding that one purpose mattered more than another. The roads welcomed all who respected them. Step after steady step, familiar landscapes unfolded with quiet consistency, inviting gentle reflection as the miles slowly disappeared beneath patient feet. Hospitality held an honored place within Greek life. A traveler arriving at sunset might receive bread, water, and a place to sleep before being asked many questions. Such kindness strengthened the bonds between communities separated by long roads and rugged mountains. Hermes, who often traveled in disguise within myths, reminded listeners that every stranger deserved respectful treatment. Acts of welcome became simple expressions of order and balance, quietly sustaining daily life throughout the Greek world. The sounds surrounding Hermes' world were often gentle rather than dramatic. Sandals brushed dusty paths, wagon wheels rolled steadily over packed earth, distant sheep bells echoed across hillsides, and birds greeted the rising sun. Even a marketplace settled into familiar rhythms instead of constant excitement. These everyday sounds formed the peaceful background of countless journeys, reminding travelers that ordinary life possessed its own quiet beauty without requiring grand adventures. Hermes was also honored as a patron of cleverness, encouraging thoughtful solutions instead of unnecessary conflict. Merchants solved disagreements through conversation, travelers exchanged useful advice, and neighbors relied upon practical wisdom passed from one generation to the next. Intelligence in Greek tradition often appeared through calm observation rather than loud display. Like a traveler choosing the safest path through familiar hills, wisdom quietly revealed itself through patience and careful attention. As afternoon light softened, roads gradually became quieter. Travelers who had begun early approached welcoming villages before evening arrived. Smoke drifted gently upward from household fires, while distant fields settled beneath golden sunlight. Hermes' protection extended through these peaceful endings as much as lively beginnings. Completing a journey safely brought quiet satisfaction, allowing weary feet to rest and grateful hearts to appreciate the simple comfort of arrival. Throughout generations, the image of Hermes remained closely tied to movement that served life rather than disturbed it. Roads carried harvests, friendships, messages, music, and shared traditions across mountains and islands alike. Every successful journey strengthened invisible connections between people living far apart. In this way, the god of travelers symbolized not endless motion, but enduring relationships created through steady, peaceful travel across the landscapes of ancient Greece. When twilight finally settled across the countryside, the roads rested beneath cooling skies. Market stalls closed, ships remained quietly moored, and travelers found shelter before night deepened. Hermes' work was complete for another gentle day. The paths that had welcomed so many footsteps now waited in silence for tomorrow's calm beginnings. Beneath the first stars, ancient Greece seemed connected by peaceful roads stretching beyond the horizon, carrying quiet promises of safe journeys yet to come. As evening settled across the hills of Greece, Hermes often turned once more toward familiar roads. Though his journeys carried him between Olympus, distant islands, quiet valleys, and the unseen borders of the underworld, every path eventually curved toward home. His winged sandals never hurried when there was no urgent message to carry. The earth beneath them seemed to remember each gentle step, while olive trees leaned softly beside the roads. Travelers believed that familiar routes held their own quiet comfort, and Hermes, who knew every crossing, welcomed the peaceful rhythm of returning rather than arriving. Ancient roads were never perfectly straight. They followed the shape of hills, streams, and old stone walls built by countless generations. Hermes accepted every bend without complaint, for the shortest path was not always the most graceful. His journeys reflected the landscape itself, winding with patience through valleys filled with fragrant herbs and over gentle ridges where warm breezes carried the scent of pine. Each familiar turn became part of a rhythm that repeated quietly through every season, unchanged by passing years. Small stone cairns known as Hermes stood beside many roads. These humble markers honored Hermes as guardian of travelers and protector of boundaries. Passing them was a simple reminder that every journey consisted of many small moments rather than one great destination. Some travelers paused to straighten a loose stone or leave a quiet offering before continuing onward. Hermes needed no gifts to recognize their gratitude. Yet these modest traditions reflected the calm respect shared between the god and those who trusted the roads. As daylight softened, birds gradually settled into olive branches, while shepherds guided distant flocks toward their evening shelters. Hermes observed these gentle routines with quiet appreciation. He was a god of movement, yet he understood the importance of returning before darkness fully embraced the hills. Every creature seemed to know its own familiar direction. The roads themselves became peaceful threads connecting fields, villages, temples, and mountain passes into one calm landscape resting beneath the growing twilight. The caduceus rested lightly in Hermes' hand as he walked. Its twin serpents symbolized balance and harmony rather than conflict, reminding travelers that opposing paths could often meet peacefully. The staff was not merely a sign of authority, but also of safe passage and calm guidance. Even when no words were spoken, its presence suggested quiet understanding between distant places. Along empty roads, it reflected the fading sunlight with gentle brightness before evening slowly welcomed the stars. Hermes crossed countless bridges built from carefully fitted stone. Beneath them, narrow streams reflected the evening sky in soft ripples that drifted slowly around smooth rocks. Bridges represented more than practical crossings. They joined separate lands without disturbing the flowing water below. Hermes appreciated these thoughtful creations, for much of his own work connected distant realms while allowing each to remain peacefully itself. Crossing a bridge became another quiet reminder that gentle connections often endure longer than grand monuments. Mountain winds gradually cooled as the last sunlight touched the highest peaks. Hermes welcomed the changing air with effortless ease. His cloak stirred quietly while shadows stretched across familiar trails. Above him, the first stars appeared one by one, just as they had for generations before. Their steady light offered silent companionship to every traveler still walking home. Hermes knew these constellations well, for they watched over every road whether crossed by gods or by ordinary people. The villages ahead glowed with gentle lamplight. Smoke rose calmly from hearths where families prepared simple evening meals, while distant voices faded into the stillness of approaching night. Hermes rarely lingered within every home, yet he understood their quiet importance. Journeys found meaning because there was always somewhere peaceful to return. Roads connected lives that unfolded at their own patient pace, carrying stories outward before welcoming them safely back again. Even the oldest roads changed little through the passing centuries. Rain polished their stones, grasses grew along their edges, and seasons painted the surrounding fields with different colors. Yet the direction remained faithfully the same. Hermes admired this quiet constancy. Endless travel did not require endless change. Sometimes wisdom rested in returning along the same trusted path, noticing familiar places with calmer eyes after every journey had gently reshaped the traveler. The moon gradually rose above distant hills, bathing the roads in pale silver light. Hermes continued without difficulty, for neither darkness nor distance troubled the divine messenger. Night simply revealed another peaceful face of the landscape. Quiet insects replaced daytime birds, and gentle breezes carried cooler air across open fields. The road became softer beneath the moon, inviting steady footsteps instead of hurried travel. Every mile seemed content to unfold at its own unhurried pace. Some believed Hermes occasionally paused to listen rather than to speak, The silence of empty roads carried its own quiet messages through rustling leaves, flowing water, and distant owls. Nothing needed to be translated. The landscape itself expressed gentle rhythms understood without words. For the messenger god, even silence could become a faithful companion, offering peaceful balance after carrying countless voices between gods and mortals throughout the day. Far beyond the roads, Mount Olympus rested beneath the stars with serene majesty. Hermes knew its paths as well as any earthly trail. Returning there after long journeys required no ceremony, only familiar steps carried by steady purpose. The mountain welcomed him not with celebration but with enduring stillness. Home did not need to announce itself loudly. It simply remained, patient and unchanged, waiting beyond the final bend in the road. The endless roads of Greece never truly ended. One path became another, linking valleys to harbors, temples to forests, villages to distant mountains. Hermes understood that every ending quietly prepared another beginning somewhere beyond sight. This gentle continuity gave peace to both gods and travelers alike. No journey was ever entirely separate from the next, for every road belonged to the same welcoming landscape, stretching patiently across the ancient world. At last, the rhythm of walking became as calm as breathing itself. Hermes continued onward beneath quiet heavens, his familiar route carrying him without effort through the peaceful night. The roads that had welcomed countless generations remained steady beneath his feet, unchanged in their patient purpose. They asked for nothing except careful footsteps and quiet respect. In their timeless silence, they offered the same gentle promise they always had. Every faithful traveler could eventually find the comfort of returning home.